Many people are wondering about what has been happening with Shmaltz Brewing. Well, that's exactly what we're going to be discussing on this 176th episode of
The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of The Jewish Drinking Show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to have second-time guest of the show, Rabbi Jesse Epstein. Rabbi Epstein, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back and to really come in and share the next part of our story today.
For those less familiar with Rabbi Epstein here, he is a beer-brewing, text-loving, risk-taking Jewish innovator. He is the owner of Shmaltz Brewing Company, something we discussed previously and will return to, a Jewish craft beer brand with a mission to build community and spark Jewish learning through great brews and bold ideas. With support from fellowships like the Union of Reformed Judaism's Community Cultivators Cohort in partnership with Beloved and Atra, the Center for Rabbinic Innovation, he's turned pints into platforms for everything from Torah study to social justice pop-ups and beyond. He is in his final year. Actually, he just finished very recently rabbinical school at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, where he was a Tisch rabbinical fellow and has helped lead a long-running soup kitchen. He is also the creator of Torah and Tourniquets, a bleeding control and text study workshop that draws upon his background as an EMT, and he is now heading to Seattle to begin his new role as the Assistant Rabbi at Temple Beth Am. Whether he's leading Havdalah at the local bar or spending time dreaming up a different beer for each Torah portion, he is all about making Judaism accessible, meaningful, and just a little bit hoppy. So we're going to be talking about beer for anybody who wasn't paying attention. Clearly, beer is a common theme running throughout and will run throughout this episode as well. I did mention second time guest because, of course, Rabbi Epstein remembers this, but he previously appeared at the tail end as a surprise guest to episode 117 on the first quarter century of Shmaltz Brewing that featured its founder and longtime runner, director, president, owner.
Owner.
Owner. We'll just keep it simple. Jeremy. And it's funny because when I reached out to Jeremy, I think I said this on that episode, when I reached out to Jeremy, it was post press release, I'm shutting it down, and I just wanted to hear about the quarter century of Shmaltz Brewing. That was it. And he brought along, at that time, soon to be, now actually, Rabbi Epstein. And I believe it was Jeremy's idea, but we ended up, that was 2.5 years ago, by the way, we ended up breaking the story.
This is actually an amazing way to say it for the very first time publicly that Jesse and I are doing right now.
And for listeners who haven't heard that was November 2022, so this was literally 2.5 years ago. So really, today we're talking about not necessarily the next chapter, right, Rabbi Epstein? We're really just talking about this transition, I guess transitioning Shmaltz Brewing and what it's been up to and what it's doing, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, by the way. And I just want to let your listeners in on this really exciting fact for me that this is the first time I've been introduced ever as Rabbi Epstein. I mean, you just announced that as of the date of this release, we'll have finished rabbinical school. You and I know that we're recording just before I finish up, and for 5 years now, I've been student Rabbi Jesse or rabbinic intern Epstein or some variation of that. Yes, I'm excited to share with you today what we've been working on. As you mentioned, it was November 2022 that we broke the exciting news on this show, and I've been a fan ever since and listened to a whole bunch of episodes and really enjoyed it. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
But it was not long after the deal closed when I finally purchased the Shmaltz assets from Jeremy. Mm-hmm. Jeremy has been an important mentor since then. We've stayed in touch. We've stayed close friends. He's remained a minority owner of the brand. Mm-hmm. And we, when I first reached out to him, actually, I had saw the press releases that after 25 years, Shmaltz was shutting down. I was a big fan of the brand. I announced some of this when I was on the show last time. I was a big fan. And as I began rabbinical school, knowing that I really liked beer and Judaism and mm-hmm. this intersection and the Shmaltz was perfect. I never imagined actually that I'd come to own this brand. I thought I was becoming a rabbi. I'd work in a synagogue, but I noticed something interesting just a few months into rabbinical school, because I started rabbinical school just after the COVID pandemic started, and my year in Israel was actually fully on Zoom, which was a shame. And I was lucky enough to be able to spend some months a few years later studying in Israel. But I learned Hebrew on Zoom. I learned history of Israel. I learned about the rabbinate and our culture and all of these things on Zoom. And while I was happy to be on the path I was on, it was actually really difficult, and a lot of it sucked in many ways. And I think anyone who transitions to being a Zoom student or worker in any capacity and started to experience Zoom fatigue would probably tell you parts of it sucked. But I found myself really pulling long hours in front of the computer trying to do what felt like the impossible, and to keep myself busy, really to get me away from the screen. My then girlfriend, now wife, bought me a Northern Brewer beer brewing kit, and I started making beer and getting really involved in the science and the fermentation of it all. And I realized, as I re-immersed myself in this world of beer, something I love so much, that if I was being honest with myself, I missed breweries more than I missed going to shul.
Wow.
Now, I love going to shul. I've come to really respect and engage in that tradition, but I didn't grow up in a culture, in a family, a shul going family, and it was the act of going regularly was foreign to me, and yet I was very proud to be Jewish my entire life, and I grew up with a lot of people who were similar, and all the things that I've come to learn we're supposed to do in synagogues, form community, build bonds, do deep justice, do deep learning, I actually did in breweries. So this idea formed: can we do a Jewish brewery? Can we do all the things we want to accomplish in shul in a brewery for those Jews who don't like going to shul? I thought that I would open up a competing brand to Shmaltz. And
Oh, really?
yeah, I really did. But then I saw that Shmaltz was shutting down and Jeremy was pivoting to something else. So I reached out. I tried to get his attention. I joined the online Q&As with the forward, and I asked him what he's doing with the brand. Would he sell it? I didn't. Actually, that came later. I first said, "Can I be your rabbinic intern?" Instead of going to a synagogue next year, I will be the first ever rabbinic intern at a beer brand. And he said no, but I convinced him enough to get lunch with me. And by the end of lunch, he still said no, but he convinced me to buy the brand. So there I was, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it. And suddenly I was a full-time graduate student in rabbinical school, working very hard on becoming a rabbi, which, and I had my internships at a synagogue and at the hospital and at the Hillel and all the different things. And at the same time, I suddenly had this LLC and these assets that I decided to turn into my rabbinate. And so these past 3 years or so, since we last spoke, I've been figuring out what that's supposed to look like. And that's what brings us to where we are today.
In those past 2.5 years, or roughly 30 months, really, since we last had you on, what has transpired for Shmaltz? I mean, obviously you're graduating, so that's obviously big in your personal and professional life. But I think a lot of people are curious. I'm curious. I think a lot of people are curious. Those 30 months, those 2.5 years, what's transpired with Shmaltz? Obviously, you mentioned this transition from Jeremy to you. I know that I got to visit about a month after that episode published. I got to visit his tap room up in Troy, New York, in upstate New York. Nice little place. It's funny. I was there on a Saturday night, and I was there having a couple beers, and then he walks in with a hand truck and a bunch of, I think some pony kegs or something. So what's transpired? Does that place still exist? Is that still Shmaltz? What's going on?
Right. Yes. The 518 Craft Tap Room. It's a great place, and it was affiliated when Jeremy owned both brands. It was affiliated. It is no longer. They still have. When I bought Shmaltz, I didn't buy the leftover beer that Jeremy had. So he might have. I think he still has some vintage bottles up there. But other than that, it's no longer an affiliated brand. We're friends with 518 Craft, but Shmaltz, the brand follows me, and so I'm based in New York City right now. That's where I've been the last few years for school, and it'll follow me when I make my way over to Seattle in just a few months.
Hello, dear listeners. It's your host, Rabbi Drew. I wanted to break in right now and just say, hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate, or watching, however you're consuming this content. And I'm always open for new ideas, both for specifically the Jewish Drinking Show, whether it's topics, whether it's guests. I'm also looking for other resources that I can provide you with in the Jewish Drinking Project more broadly. Also, I'd really like to offer you the opportunity to sponsor this work. Whether if you want to go to patreon.com/Jewish Drinking, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have ideas for swag, also, please feel free to send them to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. All right. Thank you so much, L'chaim. And now back into the episode.
What about beer? So I know, obviously, it's going to be tough to have these not only rabbinical school but internships. So to run a whole beer brewing business is going to be a lot to bear. So what beers have been brewed in those since the transition?
We've experimented, and this whole period of time has been an experimentation to figure out what we want to do, what works, what resonates with people, and how can we really make sure the brand engages as a whole within that sacred value of creativity, that perhaps most sacred value. And I say most sacred because the first thing we learn about the divine is that the divine is a creator, and we also learn that we are created in a divine image, and thus we are created in the image of a creator, and we too must be creative. That's the holiest thing we can be. So, so it's important to me, and you can probably tell I went to Skidmore College, whose motto is "Creative Thought Matters." The most important thing to me is that we're trying new things, and we're experimenting and throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. Before I bought the brand, Shmaltz did a lot of contract brewing. Its last few years was contract brewing. We've done a little bit of contract brewing, experimenting with different relationships. We've actually done a little bit of experimentation with home brewing, and through the experimentation, we've created a bunch of different labels. We've created a bunch of different beer names for future beers. That's actually come out of different assignments in rabbinical school. I'm working on a different beer for every single parsha. We've got,
nice.
We've got. I think I'm all the way through Exodus at this point. My favorite beer is a beer that tells the story of Jacob and Esau. When Esau comes running in famished and wants something to eat, and Jacob's in the kitchen cooking the red lentil soup, and decides to trick Esau into selling his birthright, for the soup. We recall from the Torah that essentially, and this is my translation, Esau says, "Give me some of that red stuff." And I think that would be a perfect beer name for a red ale or something. So that's
nice.
That's something.
I thought you were going to say you're going to throw in red lentils into the mash, but
I'm going to write that one down. No. So we've done a lot of experimentation on paper, but when it comes to what we've actually put in the tank and brewed, we brewed the first beer that we made, and none of this is commercial. This is all internal and at our own events so far. The first beer we experimented with was a beer for my wedding last August. We made an American wheat beer, which is a great summer beer, and also one that I thought would be pretty palatable to all those folks who say, "Oh, I don't really like beer." This is, and we called this beer Sheva Brufot, which is a pun, of course, on the Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings that you say under the chuppah at a Jewish wedding. And I'm holding the can up for you to see, Drew, and I'll describe it for your listeners. The can is white, a color that we associate with holy moments in Jewish time. Weddings, funerals, Yom Kippur, all these Shabbat even. And then we were experimenting with a new logo. The logo is a round seal with a shin in it that's meant to resemble the stained glass that you see in a shul. For the folks who don't go to shul, we're bringing shul to them through beer. The shin not only stands for Shmaltz Brewing, but of course stands for Shaddai in the same way, one of the names for God, in the same way a mezuzah or a tefillah, the shin stands for this name of God. So we bring the divine to people as well. We have mine and my wife's names in English and Hebrew, our date, and as well as the Hebrew date. So we've got, I think, just the presence of some Hebrew on the can actually is a big deal. The recognition that this is Jewish. But the back of the can might be my favorite, because on the back of the can, we have what looks like a ketubah. If I hold it right.
Okay. Yeah.
It looks like a ketubah. Of course, the document that we sign at a Jewish wedding, the contract. And the border of the ketubah, on the outside, it's a tiling pattern, and on the inside, it's challah loaves. And so on the outside, the tiling pattern actually comes from my own ketubah, from the paper cut pattern, and that pattern was pulled by our ketubah artist from an archaeological article about the Second Temple. So that was a
Oh,
tiling
neat.
pattern on the floor of the temple. And then the challah is there because this beer is meant to taste like challah that have been dipped in honey. And that's supposed to, I wanted to teach my wedding guests through this beer, and that's what it's all about. Teach them about the tradition of a wedding couple for a year after marriage dips their challah in honey instead of salt on Shabbat. To symbolize the sweet life that they'll have together. So that's what this beer is supposed to taste like. We brewed it with honey, and we also brewed it with pomegranates because pomegranates are a connection to the Torah, to the in resembling the 613 commandments through their seeds, their connection to the Holy Land, and then of course pomegranates are a symbol of fertility and fruitfulness of mind and body.
Very nice. So that's one beer. And any other beers that you've brewed for a public consumption aside from your R&D, your experimental aspects?
Nothing has been distributed just yet. We are working, I knew that once I finished rabbinical school, and this is actually a really nice buffer. One, I didn't want to run a physical brick and mortar as a graduate student. This is a brand I care a whole lot about, and I don't want to set myself up to fail. And running a brick and mortar brew pub, while a grad student is not going to work. But also, I didn't know where I'd end up as a rabbi, and applying for the state licenses in one state and moving to another state in order to brew and distribute, that wasn't going to work either. So now that I know where I'm going to go, we're getting our distribution channel, our brewing channels and our distribution channels up and running, hopefully in Seattle in the not too distant future. But we've been focusing on internal and experimenting. If you hear sizzle, I'm actually opening this beer. I haven't had it in a little while. And so the one other beer that that's coming to mind right now that we've experimented with is the one that we bottled yesterday. We're brewing a very special ordination beer that I'm going to debut and showcase at Temple Emmanuel in New York City for my rabbinic classes ordination. And so we'll already have done that, of course, when everyone's listening. The beer is called Make the Old New and the New Hoppy. It is inspired by Harav Kook, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, and his charge to us to make the old new and the new holy, which I place at the center of my rabbinic mission. It's a very important quote to me. So we decided to think about how can we embody that quote and that teaching in a beer? How can we get both the old and the new in there? We decided to take one of the oldest beer recipes out there, and you'll know this in 6 different tractates of the Talmud. We see date beer referenced in some way. So we decided to make a date beer, but to make it modern by brewing it in the style of a West Coast IPA. So
nice.
we brewed a West Coast IPA using only Washington State hops to honor my journey there. And we poured in some jars of Ceylon into the brew, into the mash. The Israeli date honey. And then we also got from the old world and the new world. So we used primarily German Pilsner malt. We wanted to embody that aspect of diaspora, Europe, the old world, where for me it's important because it's where the reform movement, of the movement I'm a part of, where it all began. And then we have American Greens show where I am and where the movement flourished.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I want to break in and give you a sneak peek into next week's episode, also beer related. Here it is.
But it's not a bladder, it's a swim bladder.
Oh, okay. Specifically
right?
swim bladder. Okay.
Yes, it's a bladder, but a bladder is just basically an organ that can inflate and contain stuff, right? So this is a swim bladder.
I hope you enjoy that sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Rabbi Eli Fisher. Now back into this week's episode featuring Rabbi Jesse Epstein, also talking about beer.
A couple other things I heard about and I'm curious about, first of which are pilot events. So I guess in these past 2.5 years, you've been doing some shul brewing, craft beer and crafting, Torah and tap. So what, we'll get to the second one a little bit later, but what have these been?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that because these have been just so much fun. As I mentioned to you earlier, I got my start in beer. Well, I guess I got my start in drinking beer, but when I got really involved at the beginning of rabbinical school, remember I got that home brewing kit, and home brewing, um, I think, is a very creative endeavor and a lot of fun. And so
Mhm.
the ordination beer I spoke about is actually being made with a number of home brewers here in New York City. We're not contract brewing that or commercially brewing it in any way.
Mhm.
And I once asked this question: could we take the framework of home brewing and apply it to the synagogue? So many synagogues do challah baking programs and challah baking classes. It's the same ingredients. You need the same setting. You need a good kitchen. You need a few
Yeah.
buckets.
Yeah.
Can we, instead of home brewing, can we do shul brewing? And so I did a shul brewing program at one of my internship sites, Temple Sinai of Saratoga Springs. We had a blast. We made a few gallons of beer. We broke into
Mhm.
different groups, and each group made 1 gallon. And we had it brewing, and we had a big celebration at the end.
Oh, nice.
So that was really great. But I've done different. We've done beer in the sukkah, and we've done Maimuna, post
Mm.
Pesach, beer style parties. We did a huge Purim party a few years ago.
Mm.
That was fantastic,
Yeah.
and that was very justice oriented. We had over 300 young adults show up. We thought maybe we could get 80 or something. This was in the basement of my rabbinical school, and it's not easy to get young adults to show up. And the tickets sold like crazy. We had a
Wow.
Megillah inspired drag performance at this event. We sold T-shirts that said Hebrew, she brew, they brew on
Mm.
them to in order to showcase our brand's gender expansiveness, which is important. Especially considering that both beer and Judaism have been so male dominated for much of their histories, and Schmaltz in particular being Hebrew. That's the sub brand that we're most well known for. And Schmaltz historically has done a few Hebrew lines, but the
Mm.
gender piece also because I represent that male majority as well in my own identity. Is really important that we showcase gender expansiveness in what we're doing. These are just a few ideas, a few ways. We've been able to get those values in there.
Mhm.
This is a value-based beer.
Mhm.
And everybody asks me, as soon as they hear that I have a Jewish beer brand, uh, I'd say at least 80% of the time. The first question is, "Oh, so it's kosher, right?"
Mm.
It's a kosher beer. That's how it's Jewish, or what? Like, why it's Jewish? You say a blessing over it, and
Mm.
yes, I do say a blessing actually, before I eat and drink. And it is kosher, the beer,
Mhm.
but I don't think that's why it's Jewish.
Mm.
Plenty of you could go into Trader Joe's and plenty of their stuff is kosher. I don't think all their food is Jewish,
Mhm.
and that's not what makes food Jewish. I think that it is the values, the Jewish values behind what you're doing. We
Mm.
might call that the kavanah, the intention behind the brand's mission and behind how you operate it and how you
Mhm.
live it. I actually just submitted my rabbinic thesis, my capstone project on the laws of Jewish agency because I wanted to study the ethics of how a business operates, so that Schmaltz's
Mm.
own business plan could be built upon that foundation.
Mm.
And that's what makes it Jewish.
You shared about the shul brewing, the craft beer, and crafting the Torah and Tap. What Torah and Tap initiatives have you? I don't know if it's you, Schmaltz Brewing. I don't know if those can be teased apart, but yeah,
There's some gray area for sure.
yeah.
So many different synagogues do their own sort of Torah on tap or Jews and Brews program, which is
Hmm.
fantastic. And I love hearing about how different synagogues do it. One of the ideas we've had for Schmaltz is to sort of provide a standardized curriculum, since it seems to be such a popular program.
Mm.
Rather than every synagogue have to recreate it,
Hmm.
we can create a Schmaltz curriculum that can be used by different synagogues for whatever group one, whether it's a 20s, 30s group or brotherhood or sisterhood or any other group at a synagogue that's looking to do some kind of program around beer. We can provide some resources around that.
Hmm.
That's been one of the themes, and I've done a few different types. We've done different source sheets, but really the best way I found to do any sort of Torah on tap or Jews and Brews program is to teach the subject matter, usually a holiday, but it could be something else, through a flight of beer. How do we actually very creatively embody this time of year or this day or this text even in a can of beer or in a few bottles of beer? And I'll give you a quick example because it might not be clear right away what I'm talking about. The next major festival, at least a traditional major festival that we have coming up on our calendar, we know that between Pesach and Shavuot we have 49 days. Passover is after the winter we have this first harvest, and Passover is the barley harvest. It's when this crop for beer is first started. We first start harvesting it, and the whole harvest lasts 7 weeks, 7 days of 49 days. One might argue that in the ancient world, Shavuot, at the end of this 49-day period, was the perfect beer holiday, and that beer is the perfect Shavuot food, because if the barley was harvested 7 weeks earlier, you could ferment it into beer just in time for Shavuot. It's on Shavuot that the harvest switches from barley to wheat, which is why in Israel, you're in Jerusalem on Shavuot, you see everyone holding the omer, right? Literally a sheet of wheat, walking around the entire city. And I've taught Shavuot through a beer flight. Oh, yes.
Go for it.
I've taught Shavuot through a beer flight a few times. I pick 5 different beers. I go to whatever local craft beer store is near me, and I'll pick barley wine to teach the harvest that we're moving away from. I'll pick a wheat beer to teach the harvest that we're transitioning into. I will pick some kind of coffee stout or coffee ale or something to talk about the tradition of staying up all night studying and when that started and how it coincided with the introduction of coffee to the region, and all of that. And then our 4th beer out of 5 is some kind of lactose brewed sour or milk stout, because of course
the dairy
Shavuot is a dairy holiday. Yes, you got your cheesecake, you got your ice cream, and your lactose brewed sour or your milk stout. And then finally, the 5th and final beer in my Shavuot beer flight. It wouldn't be a full celebration without incorporating the text of the holiday, the Megillat Ruth, right? This is the text we read on Shavuot. And at one point in the story of Ruth, Naomi, central figure of the story, says to Ruth that she wants her name to be changed from Naomi to Mara. Right, Mara means bitter, and there's a lot of emotion behind this name change, and we can dive into why she wanted to do this, and what she was upset about, and all of that. But in order to teach that and really get into the text, I serve some IPA. That's how we get an IPA in there, because we want the bitter hoppiness, the bitterness that comes from the hops. Or we can do like an English style bitter or something like that. Yeah. But that's really just how we get it, the different dimensions of the holiday through a beer flight. And we could do the same thing for the period of the Omer, or I really want to do a hard cider and a mead for Rosh Hashanah. We did a cider and mead poetry reading a few years ago. But apples and honey, that's what it's about.
It sounds like you've been doing all these sorts of experimentation of trying things out. And as you're about to transition geographically over to Seattle, you're taking part in this, I think we mentioned it at the outset with the bio, this Jewish Community Cultivators cohort. So what does that entail? And of course, specific to our topic, how does that relate to schmaltz and beer?
I've never actually been to Seattle, so it's just like a word on that. I'm so excited. I've been once for my interview, but I've never been to Seattle, never been to the Pacific Northwest. I've never actually in my life been to the West Coast other than for my interview. And it's crazy. And when I landed, and I'm a hiker, I like nature and outdoors, so it's crazy that I live on the 12th floor of a Manhattan apartment and I've never been to Seattle. But when I stepped foot in that city, I fell in love. I fell in love with the community that I'm going to. They're made up of such wonderful people, and eager and excited. And Seattle is a beer city.
Hey there, I wanted to break in yet again. Although I asked for support in financial ways because it does cost some money to make the hosting happen and other aspects of Jewish drinking happen. So your financial support is definitely appreciated. And don't forget, you can go to jewishdrinking.com/donate. But also, Another way of supporting the show and everything that Jewish Drinking does is also to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you like this content, if you like this show, maybe people you know also like it. So feel free to let them know, hey, I have this interesting episode I heard, or a few episodes, or whatever it is, or even a few clips. Feel free to share with your friends. All right. Thank you so much. Now back into the show.
One thing that HUC didn't really teach me, and they were never expected to teach me this, is how to run a business. And we're actually getting there a little bit. HUC has a school of nonprofit management, and
Oh, really? Nice.
and I spent 2 years. I earned the fellowship twice at HUC, the Be Wise Fellowship in Jewish entrepreneurialism, and I'm in that's at HUC. I've been in the for 3 years. I've been in the Tish Fellowship, which also encourages us to think differently and make new sentences and all of that. So there have been opportunities at HUC to get creative and innovative, but it's all been focused on that divine aspect of creativity I spoke about earlier, and never on the tactless of running a business and how to how to build a budget and how to build a board and communicate with a board and seek advisors and coaches and how to pitch a project even. And so I've had to seek some of those things out myself, not just for those practical skills and courses and everything, but also I've had to seek out a community of other Jewish entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general, other people doing similar wonderful projects that we can be in community with one another and share our challenges and our successes and stories. So I've been lucky to do that through a cohort, the Jewish Innovation Fellowship at the 92nd Street Y, through Atra, the Center for Rabbinic Innovation, their fellowship for rabbinic entrepreneurs, and now currently and importantly in my final year of rabbinical school. And so this is really the cohort that's providing me with the launch pad into my rabbinate and out into the real world in a lot of ways, through the URJ and Beloved, through their Community Cultivators cohort, where they bring in a different expert each month to talk about refining your brand's story, or or really any of the other things I spoke about before, any of these important components of business, from money to relationship build. It has proven so important and valuable, both for those skills and all the notes I'm taking, but just as valuable for the mentorship and for the chavruta, for being able to, be with other people. It's hard work to, we're breaking the mold. People look at me and they're like, are you sure you wanted to be a rabbi and not, an entrepreneur or a beer brewer? But I would have gone for school for that if that was my main path. The beer is a vessel for my rabbinic work. The brewer, it's about community. It's about meaning making. It's not about beer. We have good beer, and beer is the way we get there. I still need to learn how to run it successfully and how to bring people in. And it's lonely work, but having other people I can engage in chavruta and lean on them when something's not working or when it's taking too long, or people to celebrate me when a new article comes out or a podcast or something else. It is so valuable to be in this space with others.
You're moving to Seattle. Obviously, you're seeking out ability to create community. Obviously, you'll have the Temple Beth Am job. How much do you envision or dream up? Obviously, it's hard to talk about the future, but what would you like to see Shmaltz develop into in its next chapter when it's now on West Coast?
This is my favorite question because it allows me to dream, and that's my favorite thing to do. We're writing the business plan right now. We haven't done a pilot program in a little while because we've gathered a lot of data already, and we've been compiling it into what Shmaltz is going to look like next. We've learned a lot about what it means to have a sacred space, and so the idea of a physical space, at least one, and maybe in the long-term future, multiple sacred spaces, the actual brew pub where we can welcome people in and do this work together. That'll be a part of Schmaltz's future down the line. But until then, we want to get distribution back up and running. Shmaltz was sold before the brand shut down, and I bought it, I think, in 37 states or so.
Wow.
And so I get emails every day for the last 2.5 years. When are we going to get, a Messiah, not, brown ale back? And when is Genesis coming? So we're going to bring back some of the old favorites and brew some new stuff and get those on shelves.
By the
get
way,
those.
that's incredible
Yeah,
that people are reaching. That's not just a theoretical demand out there. That is
yeah,
a very vocal demand that they, like a lot of people just kvetch into the air. But these are people that are directly asking you, like, we want this.
yeah. No, there are some people that haven't seen the press releases and don't know, and they're like, I just haven't seen it on the shelf in a while. Like Whole Foods used to have Lenny's or whatever. Can we get that back? And it's hard. It's really nice. So we want to bring back some of the old favorites. We're working on rebranding some of the imaging because after 25 years, any brand can you want to scale back a little bit, and we've gone in a few different directions, and some things need to be modernized to convey our new mission. So we're rebranding, and we're gonna do some more events, weekend residencies with different Jewish communities. When I'm not
Mhm.
working at my shul, I'll be able to go elsewhere and do some programs. Shul brewing, I want to create materials for other people to do
Mm.
programs without me there. Like I said earlier, the curricula. And then one other thing that I think might be a really fun part of the Schmaltz business plan um, is custom beer. I
Mm.
told you about the wedding beer. But what people love about schmaltz and what people have always loved about schmaltz is the shtick of it. When you think about what schmaltz means, and I'm not talking about the old definition, the chicken fat. I'm a vegetarian, by the way, and all the beer is vegetarian. I have gotten people ask me, people said, I'm so sorry, I'd love to drink your beer, but I'm a vegetarian. I'm like, there's no chicken fat in the beer, I promise. And what schmaltz has come to mean in our American Yiddish context is that it, something that's schmaltzy is fun, lighthearted, nostalgic, maybe a
Mm.
little over the top,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that's what this brand represents. And people love the shtick, the puns, and they're not going anywhere. It's very important, but they're also now going to be used differently. So the puns are a doorway into
Mm.
deeper learning. They're going to invite people in. When we have our eventual brew pub, it's not just a place for Jews. I talked earlier about those Jews who like to go to shul and those who don't for whatever reason, whether they find it inaccessible or foreign because of the languages or the music that they don't know or whatever, or whether they just find it irrelevant or different or scary or whatever. I'm not
Mhm.
judging that. This for the Jews who go to shul. I'm not asking for schmaltz to replace their shul. I don't want that. And I don't think the Jews who go to shul are going to stop because I have a beer company. I think what I'm hoping is that schmaltz will be another option in the Jewish ecosystem and will supplement what people are
Mhm.
getting elsewhere for those who go elsewhere. And then for those Jews who don't really go to shul and don't have another Jewish community, I'm hoping schmaltz can be that and can be this place where they feel comfortable. A brew pub is already a place. So many, it's a comfortable place, and we really have to think about what a pub is. Pub. Not everyone realizes is short for public house. That's
Mhm.
how it originated,
Yep.
and it's not. I lived in the UK for a little while, and that's really where I learned that a pub is so different from the concept of an American bar, which is all about the alcohol. But a
Mm.
pub is a family-friendly environment. It's a place you can do business meetings. It's a
Mm.
place you have deep conversations.
Mm.
Or you're in community. A sports pub. You're in community. You're cheering. You're a fan. Um, and uh, and so we want to be that for Jews, for all different kinds of Jews, from from Orthodox to Reform to secular. We want to be that for non-Jewish family members
Mhm.
and spouses and friends and cousins of Jews who are interested in learning more and being a part of the community in whatever way that means to them. And we also want to welcome in those who don't know much about Judaism, who are interested, who want to learn more and be a part of it, or even those who are skeptical of Jews, dare I say. Maybe that's controversial, but what better place to talk
Mm.
about our differences and hash it out and begin to understand one another than over a pint in a friendly atmosphere. So that's where the community building happens. That's where the learning happens. You can imagine doing chavruta across the table over a pint of a
Mhm.
Jewish beer that has to do with the parsha you're studying. I mean, there's so
Right.
many dimensions here.
So I'm kind of curious now that you're talking about this model, you're envisioning this model for such a space. How similar or dissimilar do you envision it from Lair House in Boston, which opened just a little over 2 years ago?
I'm such a huge fan of Lair House,
Mm.
and what Rabbi Charlie Schwartz and Jonathan Thor have done. I've communicated with Rabbi Schwartz a number of times. I met him. He's a wonderful guy. And
previous guest of the show.
Yes, and that's a great episode. But I learned a lot from that episode, actually.
Awesome.
Like about like, I think one thing that stood out to me was about like different cocktail ingredients that are not kosher and having to find alternatives. Like that was so fascinating to me. That was great. I think there's certainly some overlap in what we're trying to do, and then there's differences as well. We're focused more on the product of the beer right now, and less on the space. And then when it comes time to think about the space, we'll have to think about where the overlaps are and how different it is. And I envision a place that's more like a brewery with actual tanks where you see this thing being created and you're a part of the process in that way, and that you're there where it happens. I think that like we can parse out the differences between a pub and a tavern. Ultimately, there's a lot of overlap. I'm going to keep being a fan. I view Rabbi Charlie as someone I can learn from. He's a great rabbi in addition to being a great business owner. And it's funny because they came up with this idea, during the pandemic when people were gathering, from the articles I've read and the podcasts I've listened to and my conversations, they came up with this idea during the pandemic around the same time I started brewing beer and thinking how great would it be for there to be this informal gathering space in the pubby environment and everything. And I started telling all of my classmates at HUC who are with me on Zoom, like, I want to do this new kind of rabbinate in a pub sort of space. And like, I was getting crazy about it and talking about it. And, clearly I didn't have the resources to make it happen quickly. Rabbinical, I was not that far out of college. But the day the JTA article dropped announcing Lair House, 8 of my classmates sent me the article saying, have you seen this? This seems to be what you're talking about. So, I mean, you're right to ask, because there's like clearly, there's clearly similar goals in mind to gather and bring people together.
So, Rabbi Epstein, this has been wonderful. This has been really insightful. Before we go, since I know you've listened to my episodes, what the final question is there anything you would like to promote?
Thank you for asking. Right now we're working a lot on the back. The ordination beer is going to be consumed and enjoyed and promoted a little bit, even though we're not distributing it. By the time people are listening to this, I'm going to be, by the time folks are listening to this, I'll be adjusting to Seattle. I'll be moving there. And if any of your listeners are in the Pacific Northwest, I'd really love to meet people in person. Now is actually a great opportunity for your listeners to get involved, because we're still deciding what exactly we want to do. We're writing the business plan as we speak, and it's not going to be done completely by the time this episode comes out. And so if folks are listening to this episode and they're like, a really cool thing for Shmaltz to do would be XYZ, or I've got an idea, or I want to collaborate with Shmaltz and get in on the action, send me a message. Feel free to reach out to me. It's my Shmaltz email is jesse@shmaltzbrewing.com, and that's Jesse, Jesse. Shmaltz is spelled Shmaltz. There's no C in it. So reach out to me, because I'd love to hear from you. And if you're in the Seattle area, you happen to be passing through, come say hi, because ultimately it's these in-person connections that we can facilitate. We'll grab a beer together, and I want to share more and hear all about your thoughts and ideas.
I mean, sounds great. And to that, I'm going to say, L'chaim.
L'chaim.